Hello there. This year, Aotearoa heads again to the polls. Join us as we follow 6 Kiwis in the lead up to this year's general election in the public gallery. Every 3 years, New Zealanders go to the polls to choose the next government. It's an important choice as we pick between ideologies and direction, ask ourselves if we want to focus on ourselves or on the wider issues as a society, and choose who we think will be the best to face those issues for us. The 2020 election was historic. Amidst COVID, it gave the New Zealand Labour Party the only outright majority we've seen since MMP was introduced. But since then, there have been election scandals, by elections, more COVID, leadership changes in 2 major parties, and a whole lot of sausage rolls. This year feels different. The public gallery isn't about the policies and promises from politicians. It's about voters. It's about how messaging works. It's about how engaged we all are as we go in and explore what this election means for people. I've asked 6 people from around the motu to help me understand what it is they're seeing, how it makes them feel, and if it's going to have any impact on their choice to vote. In this episode, we're going to meet them. Then every week we'll catch up with half of them, alternating fortnightly, to see what's changed as we edge closer to October 14, Election Day. Kirikiriroa Hamilton has 2 electorates within the city, Hamilton East and Hamilton West, which is no longer split by the river, but mentally it kind of feels like it is. The Hamilton West electorate is seen by many as a bellwether seat, despite historically being occupied by more National Party MPs than Labour parties have won. That makes any sense. At the same time, the electorate has seen a lot of democracy over the last 18 months. There was the local body elections, and then there was the by-election last year brought about by the resignation of Dr. Gaurav Sharma. And now it's time for another election. Last year's by-election was won by Tama Pōtaka on just 7,000 votes, in an electorate with nearly 40,000 voters.
It seems like every election we have here is hard fought.
For Art, he's kind of electioned out. A writer who dabbles in both fantasy works and corporate work, Art doesn't live in an affluent part of the electorate, and that definitely plays a part into why he thinks policing is such an important issue for him.
You know, we're looking at the election of Georgie Dancy versus Tama, and, you know, like, how many votes was even in it? Like 5,000, 10,000 votes? That's like minimal numbers of available voters in this electorate. I guess we just don't care here. We've got too many things to worry about. Like, when we go to the supermarket, are we going to be able to afford milk? You know, we just don't care about the elections because it doesn't seem to have an actual on the street impact for any of us. You know, everyone says, every party says, oh, we're going to be looking into the supermarkets, and then they look into the supermarkets and say, oh yeah, you know, their sales are all pretend, or, you know, their pricing's way up the wazoo, and then nothing happens. So, like, yeah, as far as elections go, I don't think this one's important. I think it's probably just a case of it's now National's turn.
On top of that, he feels, like many people in lower socioeconomic areas, that politicians don't seem to be really genuine when they're campaigning for the Hamilton West vote, particularly around him.
Well, he's never knocked on my door. I've never seen him down at the Frankton markets. Haven't seen him even wandering Victoria Street looking for a cafe like the rest of us. So in terms of visibility, he sure has a lot of pretty pictures on his website about him being around this side of the city. But, you know, let's be frank, he doesn't live on this side of the river. Like, you know, as far as I can tell from him being in the news, I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago, talking about crime in Hamilton, he was saying his daughter doesn't like going to the dairy anymore because it was robbed once. The dairy he was referring to is over in Woodstock somewhere, which, for your people outside of Hamilton is the other side of the river, quite an affluent area. I know Labour has announced someone for Hamilton West, but the picture that they used to announce her was her standing halfway across the Fairfield Bridge, which kind of sums up how, a lot of people like to run for Hamilton West. No one wants to live here.
So, with that all in mind, Art's most significant policy he's looking for should come as no surprise. It's about housing, and what he sees as a clear link between the lack of affordable housing and crime issues.
There's a place called Ulster Street, which used to be kind of a tourist hub. But for maybe almost 10 years, it's become a slum. They've got really nice hotels there and motels and, all that kind of stuff. And they are just filled with homeless people who have nowhere else to go because no houses are being built. Because every time they try and build houses, someone with a pool in their yard cries about their property values diminishing. It's like, and now in the past 6 months, there's been reports of gangs kind of pimping women out of there, running drugs through the children in those hotels. And they've created a slum, and every party just kicks it down the road. National goes, oh, here's our solution, and it's not a solution. And Labour says, here's our solution, and it's not a solution. And the other parties say, oh, we're going to make boot camps, or we're going to send them all to prison or whatever. And none of them are solutions. It just maintains, these hotels are right next to our rugby park, a big rugby stadium with international games. They kick those people out during field days. They kick those people out during international sports tournaments. Where do they go then? To all the houses that have been built? No one's building them. No one has a solution to build them. So my 100% must have, someone needs to come in and tell councils, okay, enough with the NIMBYs. You have thousands of homeless people who are living in hotels long term, which are slowly being overtaken by gangs, and no one does anything because those people don't vote. They don't give two fucks.
At the other end of the country, we've got Scout, who's Ngāti Kahu Nyunyu ki te Wairoa and Ngāti Porou. Scout is actually in the largest electorate in the country, Te Tai Tonga, which spans from Wellington all the way down to the bottom of the Stewart Island and includes the Chatham Islands. By physical space, it is the largest electorate by far, and it's represented by one MP, Rino Te Kateni. That's a lot of space for one MP to get around, and for Scout, that causes some serious issues.
At this point, I feel like the sheer size of the electorate is the biggest issue for the electorate because there's so much that happens, on one end of the electorate that the other end doesn't have to deal with. It's not very localized. It's the largest electorate in the country, and it's quite hard to pin down any one thing that is actually an issue.
As the chairperson of a Kohonga Reo and a parent, Scout's got some serious concerns around things like the costs of living crisis. Moves by the government, or lack thereof, are a real concern to them about how it's actually not helping the people that they think that it should be helping.
I need to see policies that are going to further uphold the mana of Te Ao Māori, particularly in those languaging spaces. I'm the chairperson at a Kohonga Reo. It's really important that we have the funding that we need to do everything that we need to do. Sometimes we have to fundraise to keep the doors open, and we shouldn't be in that position as a publicly funded early childhood setting. I need to see policies that are going to make a real difference in the cost of living and a real difference in whether or not I'm going to be able to turn the heater on this year or not. The work that Labour has done was great 4 years ago, but it's just not cutting the mustard anymore. We're not in that same financial position that we were from that. The things like the winter energy payment just aren't sufficient anymore. So I need to see real change there. And I need to see, it's sad because it's become less of a priority, but a priority for me is environmental policy and making sure that we are protecting our planet in that sustainable way at the same time as we protect our people.
The other thing that Scout is really aware of is the presentation of Māori in the media to the wider public, particularly to Pāti Māori, where they seem to get a bit of a bad rap. And that's really concerning for Scout because it means that the focus is more on their actions and behaviours in a Pākehā framework than it is on the work that they're actually doing in Parliament to help their people.
Te Pāti Māori seems to only make coverage when they're getting in trouble for something, when they're not upholding those Pākehā values. And there's a lot to be said for this this construct of what is a good Māori, what is it that can make Māori palatable to the wider community and the wider media. Our behavior is inherently bad behavior, quote unquote. So it does also make a little bit of sense that the bigger party would get more coverage about it, but I just I feel like there's a lot that Te Pāti Māori does that doesn't get the coverage it deserves because of the fact that the media only likes the party, or only likes to talk about the party when they're in trouble.
In Dunedin South, we've got Sam, who's a student studying at Otago University, looking into journalism, which is an area he is really passionate about. He started This Quality, a local media source for his area that he grew up in before moving south to Otago. He studied under COVID, so remotely, and this year he's gone back to in-person study, which offers its own kind of challenges. And for Sam, the area that he's most concerned about actually isn't your mainstream politicians. It's about the proliferation of conspiracy theorists and that type of thinking when it comes to politics, politicking, and policy creation.
Yeah, I see more so Voices for Freedom. They seem to do these barbecues all the time, surprisingly outside the Labour office, which is quite interesting. There's cars driving past. This is on South Dunedin. Uh, it's near Hillside Road, and there's been quite a few occasions where I've seen them waving their signs, spreading vaccine misinformation and such, and trying to bribe the passengers in the car and the drivers in the car with a sausage and a bread. So yeah, if you're talking about seeing MPs out, no, I haven't really seen. No, I don't know if it's because I don't pay attention, but I just don't see enough action. I don't see enough community kind of interaction in my view. Maybe that's because I don't leave the house enough. But yeah, I do see Voices for Freedom more often than kind of the actual official elected MPs.
Sam has had a very specific policy around voting. He wants to stay neutral, and in the past has chosen to do that by not voting. But he does still recognise the importance of getting out there and having your say, and this year he's considering his options.
Oh yes, it is very, very, very important. And why I say it's very important is because there's a field of disinformation being spread by dangerous groups, as mentioned earlier. Voices for Freedom. We've got the Brian Tamaki lot. They've created their new party. What's their new party called? Freedoms NZ or something like that. Something like that. Yeah. So these groups are run by amateurs. They're not really in line to create policy that is going to protect and help communities with their kind of problems, if that makes sense in terms of policy. So yeah, this election will be very important. I do think that because of the amount of disinformation and such, the past years that I haven't voted, which is quite a long time, this year I might consider it, because if the wrong lot get into the gates of Parliament, then we're going to have a bad problem on our hands with dealing. And we don't want more rises of crime, or we don't want mismanagement of certain things. We want someone that knows what they're doing. Yeah.
Sam, as a student of journalism, is also acutely aware of the power of media when it comes to election campaigns and what he sees as almost like local versus big mainstream national media. He's well aware of the fact that without local media services, we run the risk of not being kept informed of what's going on locally with our local MPs. Mainstream media tends to focus on the negative or putting across their perspective.
That the local media, as in newspapers, probably do a bigger role in local reporting than mainstream. And I think that's kind of what's missing out in mainstream outlets. And what I mean by that is that mainstream outlets need to report happenings in their local townships across Aotearoa New Zealand, like across the nation. That's because there's a lot of things that happen behind closed doors that are not recorded, not seen by the public. And for example, what I mean by that is that MPs can just get away with things without scrutiny. And I think that if the mainstream media wants to get more engagement, not saying that they don't get enough, they should be reporting more because local township, you know, residents want to know what's going on in their town. They want to know what their local MP is up to. There should be always a press person following this individual. I mean, it sounds a bit stalkerish, but that's kind of what journalists do, right?
In Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, we've got Sarah, who's the host of the very successful One Up project. Now, you might have seen her in the Herald or on the news. They've done a few stories on the work that she does. She's a digital native, and she says it's important to vote, but she feels like much of her generation that she doesn't really know enough about the process or why they need to get involved. And when it comes to the electorate that she's in, well, she's not exactly sure what the issues are there either.
So, to answer your question, Paul, I'm in the New Lynn electorate, and the biggest challenge facing this electorate, oh God, I'm not too sure because I don't get too involved with local politics. I don't get too involved with politics in general, to be honest with you. And I'm not proud of that. I think it's something I should be more involved with, or at least have an opinion around. But yeah, I couldn't tell you the most pressing issue.
The Newlyn electorate's actually been a safe Labour seat since 1963, except for a brief period between 1999 and 2002 when the electorate didn't exist. In September 2021, it was actually the site of a terrorist knife attack at one of the local supermarkets, and for some strange reason, it has the largest concentration of conspiracy theorists and anti vaxxers of any electorate in the country. It's a bit strange. So, when I asked Sarah specifically around the issues that were there for voting, what's stopping her from voting, she had a fascinating outlook. She knows it's important to vote, but she thinks it's more important that you know why.
I think that what is truly important is to have an awareness and a consciousness of the issues that you care about and how those issues can potentially be solved and what part politics has to play in those resolutions, because then that's going to help you make a more informed decision over where your vote goes. I think often you can get bogged down in the politics of politics and feel a little bit disengaged, especially if you don't understand or can't relate to a lot of things that are being spoken about. But from my perspective, I think it's just important to know what you do care about and make sure you have an awareness of what is happening around those issues.
And Sarah is part of an interesting generation of voters in that she's only voted under Jacinda Ardern's premiership as Prime Minister. And the way that Jacinda dealt with politics and her outlook on what she did in her role has been a major influence on this generation in ways that they might not necessarily perceive. With Sarah, it actually comes out, I think, more in how she decides what's an important place to put her vote, what it is that she's looking for, because it's not a specific policy and it's not a specific outcome. It's about influence.
What will influence my vote will be who has a strong who has an empathetic and thoughtful approach to the way they design policy, and leaves room for flexibility in when they cooperate and coordinate with other parties and other people and other communities, which I think is a really hopeful, optimistic outlook for how politics works. But yeah, that would be the thing that would sway my vote.
Back to Hamilton West now, and we've got Kelli, who has a really unique perspective on everything going on when it comes to politics. Not only is she really heavily involved in local body politics and trying to get people out there to vote, which she's been incredibly successful at, she's also got access to Access Media. She's a presenter for Free FM, which means that she gets to sometimes sit down and talk with local body politicians and talk to the people who are making the news in the area. But even then, she's still never met Hamilton's newest MP, Tama Pōtaka. She's kind of in two minds about that as well. She's had the opportunity and passed because of who he was with, but she's been pleasantly surprised by some of his stances on certain things within their community.
Yeah, I feel a little bit conflicted when I thought about who the MP is. One, I've never met him in person. He has visited my workplace before, but with Sam Uffindale, so I mean, wasn't going to take that too seriously. Because he's a National Party MP, I was a little bit dismissive because he kind of reminds me of David Bennett in some ways. I was even more I'm not interested. But he said a few things that made me curious. I was curious about his support for co-governance structures for a housing development, and pleasantly surprised to hear he was supportive of Te Reo road signs. So they're just small things where I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a bit more to him than I was giving him credit for.
Kelli's willing to admit that she's voted across the political spectrum in the past. Sometimes it's been ACT, sometimes it's even been the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party. Her vote is very fluid. But one of the things that she's sort of struggled with is really highlighted with TOP, the Opportunities Party, and that the way that she feels she can stay informed and know who the best person to vote for comes through in the values that they present. And for her, Top hasn't really done that, but it's how she bases where she's going to place her vote.
Yeah, so I've had lots of interesting conversations with people who do think TOP sound good. The bit for me, and like their policies do, I think the reason why I haven't followed them particularly closely, or at this point in time wouldn't look to voting for them, as much as I get how they develop their policies, and that makes absolute sense and it's the right thing to do, I don't have the time or the interest to follow absolutely everything a party is doing. I like to know kind of where their values are, because that means I know that their policies will have some way have come from those values, and that saves me time and energy where I don't have to pay attention to everything. I can just trust that the policies will align with what they've said that they are, or who they are. Maybe it's a time saving thing.
With Kelli's experience with Access Media within Hamilton, which has a unique perspective to the way that it approaches politics, Kelli has really strong feelings about mainstream media and how they approach politics or don't approach politics, and exactly what it is that they really are responsible for when it comes to the messaging from politicians.
I think we've got a real problem with mainstream media and the way that they portray political issues. They have an agenda. They're supposed to be objective. We all know they're not, and as much as we know they're not, they're still choosing what's on the news. They're still choosing what gets published. And if we talk about politicians being dog whistlers, well, what does that mean if the media who allow them a platform to get those messages across, they're not digging at things enough, they're not fact checking, they're not correcting the politicians when they're interviewed, except to win themselves a little, I'm cool, I challenge this politician, but they're not getting the facts for us. They're not doing us a service at all. So I feel quite disillusioned with what I read and hear in mainstream media.
Across the river in Hamilton East, things are a little bit different for our final member of the gallery, Dan. Now, Hamilton East as an electorate is guaranteed a new MP this year. You see, the sitting MP, Jamie Strange, has decided he doesn't want to seek re-election. And the local list MP, who is a former electorate MP, David Bennett, has also decided that he's going to stand down to spend more time with his family, which means no matter who wins, Hamilton East is in for a new MP, which is a very exciting time. Well, it should be, for one of them at least. For Dan, though, he's got priorities that focus on his small business and making sure that he can do his job and keep people safe.
Like tax rules is a big thing, development for business, and crime. Really, crime's that's a big thing at the moment. That's really got me concerned. I think we're close to anarchy almost, with just the level of crime and brazenness. And
So far, Dan hasn't been impressed with the media coverage for the election. He feels it's petty, it's mudslinging, it's getting in the way of getting across the message that politicians should be getting across. And he feels that means that they should move when you're doing your electioneering, how soon they should be campaigning to make sure people are aware of what's going on and what's being promised.
it's just really slowing a bit of mudslinging between basically Labor, National Greens, ACT, and sort of minor parties trying to get their foot in the door on things. There's no real substance. So we are 3 months out from the election? 4 months? They need to promote more now, not wait till later. It's been lacking, really.
One of the other things that sets Dan apart from the rest of our group is he doesn't believe that we need to look back on the past government's successes and failures and what they've been up to. The work of somebody like John Key doesn't necessarily relate to the work of somebody like Christopher Luxon. He doesn't see it as being something that's relevant, and he has a fantastic analogy for it.
That's like trying to compare the 1987 All Blacks to the 2013 All Blacks. You can't. Different eras, different times, just different makeup of people and how people were perceived. And yeah, you just can't compare.
So that's our gallery. We've got people from the largest city all the way to the largest electorate. And they're going to be people to listen to in terms of how campaigning works, what's going to be reaching them, what's going to be making a difference, and how they are going to go out and vote. Is the media really playing fair, or do they not think that the media is playing fair? This kind of outlook, this kind of experiment, isn't the sort of thing that we usually do in elections. And there's a reason for that. We normally focus on the campaigns and the promises, the politicians and the personalities, and that's what we're presented with individually. But everybody's different. Everybody has a different background, different experiences that feed into what's important to them. And it's really important sometimes for us as voters to make sure we know what those differences are and how our vote might affect somebody else, or what their priorities are, and try and get an understanding of how different people approach different problems and see different solutions being offered to them. So over the next couple of months, what we're going to do is alternate between 3 of them. So every week there'll be a new episode, and every fortnight it'll change between who it is that's going to be on. So it's 3 one week, 3 the next week. You know, that's how things alternate. That's alternating and how it works. Make sure that you're subscribed and following on all the places that we're putting this out. You'll be able to download the podcast version of this pretty much anywhere that you get podcasts, and you can also watch the video version of this on YouTube. And if you want to get a bit of a sneak peek, paid subscribers to my Substack are able to do that as well. We'll give you secret links. You can go and watch things early. You can get in quick before anybody else does. It'd be absolutely fantastic. So join me again next week. We'll be doing a catch-up with 3 of our gallery members to find out what they think of what's happened in the media and in the election campaign over the last week. Thanks a lot.